Welcome, guys. Hello and welcome everybody to day one of our virtual 360 Summit. This is the first time that we're doing this event, so please expect some slight hitches technically. If that happens, I'm apologizing in advance, but we expect it not to happen. Before we enter the discussions of what we're going to be talking about today, I would be amiss if I didn't introduce our esteemed guests. So if I may, I will do a quick round the table based on where everybody is on my camera. So first we have Nadir Timani. Nadir, welcome. Would you like to quickly just introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm a subject matter expert working in the MENA region. I'm a certified trainer with more than 9 certifications in compliance, feed and risk and governance, with the Big Four experience, and looking forward to share my experience and insights for the audience and with you guys. Thank you.
Wonderful. Welcome and thank you for joining us. Secondly, we have the infamous Mr. John Christmas. By the way, John, just say I love Christmas and I wish my name was Una Christmas. I honestly, brilliant, fantastic name. But you are infamously known as the KGB banker. So please, there we go, quick plug. Please tell us more. Lovely to meet you and welcome.
Thank you, Una, and thank you to AML Watcher. You guys are among the best, not the only people in the world who want to expose this fraud around the whistleblower, but you're one of the few who is brave enough to kind of go outside the conventional thinking and look past the box checking. But anyway, yeah, I'm whistleblower against the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which is getting paid by the Latvian government to act as shareholder of first one bank where I was the whistleblower and then now a second bank. So that's it. It's about straw ownership of banks and how this helps banks to get correspondent accounts.
Brilliant. Thank you. And we will go into a little bit more detail about that in a little bit. But thank you for joining us. And last, but certainly not least, one of my favorite people, Mr. Adam McLaughlin. Adam, you will notice a quick name change on employment details there. So Adam, please update us. What's going on in your world? Oh, I think you're on mute. Oh. Oh, I can't hear you, Adam. Is it me?
I can't hear either.
Yep. Adam, we cannot hear you.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Perfect.
Look at that. Oh,
you're going to have to start all over again.
You talked about those technical glitches. Well, there was one.
Right, it's good that I preempted that.
So what I was saying was, thank you for the introduction, and thank you, AML Watcher, for having me. So what I was saying before no one could hear me was, so I'm about 20 years in financial crime. So been in the industry about 20 years. Started my career all the way back in the early noughties in law enforcement, where I was a police detective looking at organised crime internationally, money laundering, fraud, and just really sort of look at the money flows and the serious criminals behind it. Did that 10 years, went into banking after that. So managed second line teams in financial crime in financial institutions. Then most people probably know me from Nice Actimize. So I was Nice Actimize for 6.5 years, overseeing their strategy. And as you've seen, there is a quick name change, Una. You are right. So as of last week, I am now working for Fenergo, overseeing their financial crime strategy, innovation, and sort of business development. So it's a new role. I'm a week into it, but yeah, really sort of trying to make sure that from a technology point of view, we can really start tackling the criminals on a global scale. But that's me in a nutshell. So really great to be here. Thank you once again, and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, we're so happy that you could join us, and congratulations on the new role.
Thank you.
So today, as I mentioned, this is the first time that we've kind of brought together everybody for this type of virtual summit, and it's not your usual webinar. Usually, the webinar, it lasts, 30 minutes, 45, an hour. This is a 2-hour webinar, so be prepared. Have your coffee. I actually have mine just beside me here. But what we want to talk about today, and as John very, very kindly mentioned there, is we're not deliberately trying to be provocative in terms of the discussions we're having, but it is really, really important that we begin to disrupt, to an extent, the current situation that we have within compliance, of how compliance and general risk management has been structured in respect of the silos that we've created. And what we mean about that disruption is, with the existing setup, illicit characters have now found multiple ways to basically design and evolve new and evolving financial crime typologies. And they're no longer restricted to one element of financial crime. Financial crime, like any other term such as AI, is an umbrella term for a multitude of underlying subsets. So, under financial crime, you have money laundering, terrorist financing, data protection, cybersecurity, fraud, ABC, many, subsets. And what we have within financial organizations is all of these various areas taken care of within different silos within the organization. And the criminals will always be 1 or 2 or maybe more steps ahead of us. And they also as well have the same access to both skill sets and technology that we have, but they're not constrained by the same regulatory frameworks as well that we operate within. And as a result of that, and as a result of our inability to look more holistically at risk, we are actually detrimentally impacting our ability to combat financial crime. So that's actually one of the things that we're going to be looking at today, is we're trying to talk about the necessity to remove those silos, what that looks like, why it is so strategically important for us in order for us to move forward to better manage the risk that's presenting itself. But in addition to that, we also need to, very importantly, talk about both data and technology. The future of compliance is data-driven, and to support that, we need much better technology. So that's really going to be the gist of today's discussion, kicking off day one. Obviously, we've just dived straight into the deep end here on day one, because this is obviously a very pertinent, but also, as I said earlier, it can be quite a sensitive discussion, because what we're discussing doesn't neatly align nor fit within the general compliance framework from a regulatory perspective or a risk management perspective that we see today. And that's where we really want to start challenging regulation, bringing it a lot of it back to basics. And through these discussions and working with various regulators and industry groups around the world, we hope to be able to achieve that. So first and foremost today, actually, I don't know, but before we even start, I'm sure all of you have something to say just on that introduction. So Nadir, do you want to go first?
Yes, definitely. First, thanks for this introduction, as you highlighted the importance to have a holistic approach to fight financial crimes. Based on my opinion, that we should have first, we're gonna start with a governance. Without governance, we can't fight financial crimes. In addition to that, we need to have an efficient and effective enterprise risk management framework where fraud department, risk department, compliance department, they are all integrated and they are sharing data between each other in order to mitigate the evolving risks and the emerging risks that we are facing. In addition to that, as you said, technology is also important for banks or financial institutions where we are operating new systems that are enabled with AI. In addition to that, as you said, criminals, they are having evolving methods through deepfake and identity theft and all of that. However, the data is the most challenge on all institutions. We need to have a data cleaning methods in all institutions. In addition to that, model risk management is essential. And we need to start applying ISO 42001, where it starts how if we wanna integrate an AI system, what are the processes, what are the governance for our IT infrastructure in order to have an effective and efficient technology where we are fighting evolving and emerging risks related to financial crimes. So the base is to have a consolidated framework, attached framework, starting from a governance, to have segregation of the duties between board and senior management, to know that profit and revenues is not all about. We need to have segregation of the duties. We need to have accountability. We need to have enterprise risk management where we identify the risks in case if it is a fraud-wide risk assessment or if it is a financial crime risk assessment. Integrate all the levels of rating, the risk, inherent risks, and the residual risks, in order not to have differential rating between 1 to 3 or 1 to 5 if we have fraud and AML rating, and to integrate the data sharing, because we know fraud is a step backward for a money laundering crime. Because when a fraudster get the money, when a money launder this, so we need to have an integration between the anomalies, the data that they are getting the fraud team, and to integrate it with the AML or the financial crime compliance team to mitigate this risk that we are facing nowadays.
Yeah, I love it that you've mentioned two really, really important points there. One, obviously, enterprise-wide risk assessments, and actually three, data and AML, or sorry, and AI, and those are some things that we're really going to break down today. Those kind of the data issues. I like to refer to them as data. Some people very politely call them, data streams or data lakes. In many organizations, it's actually just data sewage pits because we've so many multiple sources of the truth. To clean up that data before we can even look at technology is a 101. But the other thing you mentioned there importantly is the enterprise-wide risk assessment. And one of the things, and this was actually something I published an article on, I think it was last week, about the 7 pillars of inherent risk. I honestly, if I look at 100 enterprise-wide risk assessments, I can guarantee you that 99, if not 100 of them, their foundational starting point is the regulation. It's not the inherent risk, it's the regulation. Yep. And something that we do very well in the industry is that we understand geographic risk, we understand industry risk, we understand client risk. What we actually do really badly is that we don't necessarily have the right people involved in risk assessments that understand the products and services we're involved in, which is probably something where John's going to jump in as well. Distribution channel, service risk, and third-party risk. And as a result of that, we're exposing ourselves to significant threats. And this was actually a really interesting discussion, and credit where credit's due, that I had with Martin Nord, CEO of Acuminor, the other week, where we were talking about this very challenge going into organizations and realizing that people within the organizations don't actually inherently understand the business that they're operating within. And most of our sanction exposure today is secondary exposure. It's not direct. And in last week, I was speaking with a gentleman, Dr. Hans. I called him Dr. Hands with the nice hands because he's very soft hands. But what he was saying was about the fact that, we don't, people who are on sanction lists are not going to open bank accounts because they know they're on the
Definitely.
list. And he
Yep.
was focused primarily on terrorism, where he was, talking about the fact that how are we going to counteract this when the biggest exposure is secondary sanction exposure, but yet RCA, relationship and close associates, it's so limited in its regulatory definition, but yet our ability to look through clients and understand, especially ultra high net worth clients, understand their connections is very, very challenging. And John, maybe that's where, we'll pull you in here quickly, and not even quickly, but again, the work that you have done would primarily focus on this type of exposure. And it's something that we just inherently do really badly in terms of identifying it.
Well, there are these big problems. This is with the culture of a specific set of banks that I'm familiar with, which are banks in Eastern Europe that are connected with the Kremlin, that they'll put in all the governance. They'll have the banks will have the whole committee structure, which it's supposed to have. Like the bank where I used to be employed in Latvia had all of that. We had a consultant, it was ABN AMRO, helped us to set up all of the committee structure. But they didn't really follow it because there was a dominant oligarch who basically told all the members of all the committees what they need to say yes and no to. So they weren't really independent people, but they were yes men to the oligarch. The whole thing with Latvia, with the regulators, the central bank, I mean, first it was the central bank, and then they split it into into the central bank and a separate organization that was the regulator, which was supposedly to improve their fight against money laundering. Interestingly, they later reversed that back again and merged the financial regulator back into the central bank. And again, a second time said that they did that to improve their anti-money laundering. And another big thing they did is make this big investment into their FIU, which gets a lot of positive press attention. And then there are things which sort of get missed, like, for example, that the money laundering and corruption in Latvia still continues without interruption, no matter what they do with the central bank, the regulator, and the FIU. It's well known in Latvia for many years who the oligarchs are, and they keep getting richer every year, and they never seem to have any problem from the central bank or the regulator or from the FIU. And a lot of it has turned into this box ticking exercise to match or to comply with the regulations to make the European Union and the United States happy that they have these all these functions which are supposed to be done where they're not really doing them, or where even the banks themselves help the clients to get past the money laundering oversight. For example, helping the customers to open the shell accounts, where a shell company is to hold the account. So the customer himself doesn't even have to make the shell company to hold the account, but rather the bank already has a bunch of these companies available to offer them to the new depositors they find. Also, even down to invoices for transfers, where there was one notorious case. It wasn't my bank, but it was a different one from the same group, was caught distributing instructions to its customers of how to make fake invoices to make the invoices that back up their transfers appear to be legitimate transfers. So yeah, there was undermining the whole system, is that they're not really trying to stop the money laundering. They're actually even giving instructions to the customers how to do it.
Wow. Yeah, I have to say, There's many things I could say to that. Some things I probably share off our discussion today. But maybe this goes back to the focus as well of the FIU and what they're focused on. And I think that's also another discussion point, in country. But before we kind of dive into all of those discussion points, Adam as well, obviously, you've been in law enforcement, obviously now working as a industry practitioner now obviously you've been in the banks, now you're in the vendor space, which for me is probably one of the most important spaces to be in right now, because technology is the driving force behind this massive shift that's underway. But in order to get that technology implemented, data and understanding the inherent risks in the business is a 101. Where are you seeing the biggest challenges and the struggles?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think my biggest, hopefully you can hear me now.
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Look, I think going back to your original introduction, the age-old adage of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The problem is it is broke. We need to fix it. It's a simple answer. Look, money laundering isn't something new. Financial crime is not something new. It's been around for centuries, really, in maybe different guys in different forms. The problem is we haven't really sort of got a grips of tackling it, right? Let's be honest, right? If you look at organized crime, it's not really gone down. It's actually gone up. You look at some of the money, what they estimate money is being laundered. It's in the trillions. Look at how many SARS are being filed. We still see percentage increases year on year, sometimes double-digit increases year on year. The system isn't fit for purpose. I'm going to be quite controversial here, but the system isn't fit for purpose. The banks are almost put into this world of having to do a tick box because they have to file SARS, because they're told to file SARS. Law enforcement getting inundated with SARS because, ultimately that's what banks have to do. And then there isn't the resource in law enforcement to actually look at all the SARS and then decide what they're going to investigate and what they're not going to investigate. So you have this perpetual conveyor belt of just information being fed into law enforcement, and they haven't got the resources to deal with it. I think we need to turn it on its head. And we've talked about risk assessments and enterprise-wide risk assessments, right? We have to be more, in my personal opinion, we have to be more intelligence-led, okay, and not just saying let's tick a box, let's just go through the motions of let file SARS. There has to be a lot more intelligent-led. That requires data. But what we need to move away from, and I'm so happy that the industry is moving in this direction, is we can't just keep, we talk about silos, a lot of this conversation is about silos, right? Silos, it's not just about internal banks, it's also, and I'm sort of jumping the gun here maybe a little bit, but it's also about having information across banks as well. This whole private to private, public to private, public to public, all this sort of thing. The criminals don't have information silos, right? They share what they need to share, when they need to share it, to who they need to share it with. Okay, they work in groups to benefit themselves. Ultimately, they're very selfish, right? Organized crime is very selfish because they want to benefit their own organized crime group. They want to profit from the crimes. They want to, grow their empires. They want to grow their sort of wealth and their power. To do that, they have to work with other groups, right? So, an Albanian gang can't, on their own, launder drugs across Europe or beyond. They have to work with the cartels in South America and Central America to move the drugs into Europe. They have to then work with other gangs in Europe to move the drugs maybe into the UK or France, right? So these gangs work together for a common purpose of furthering their own organizations. Like banks have to, and even public sector have to do the same thing. And so data has to be an intelligence commodity. We shouldn't really sort of be siloing and going, it's my data, I don't want to share it, right? The whole point of financial crime fighting is that data is there to be intelligently utilized to increase detection, increase reporting, increase focus on what we're actually trying to look at. Technology can get everyone a long way towards that. I'm not saying it's the golden nugget, it's the golden nugget, the golden bullet to solve all things and all issues. It's not. But it's a tool that'll help people get there, but we need good data, but we also need to be able to open up those guardrails that prevents us from sharing it to the right people.
I think you hit the nail on the head there with the word intelligence. And this is where I think that we as industry practitioners, sometimes we don't see the wood for the trees. And, you know, we've talked about this a few weeks ago, actually, Adam, you know, just one-to-one. But, you know, one of there's a fact. When we onboard a customer, we get approximately, let's say, 1,200 data points. But we only use around 100 to 120 of those data points day to day. We leave so much information on the shelf, on a piece of paper, and that will just gather dust and we'll never see again. And if you look at KYC in terms of its utility use case, without digital identity, we're asking individuals to basically tell us who they are, and we're ticking all the boxes. And you'd have to be an idiot to open a high-risk account if you're an illicit actor, like an absolute idiot. So you're going to want to make sure that you stay within the realms of medium and hopefully low risk. Once you're onboarded, what you want to then do, and what you will know, is with rules and scenario-based static transaction monitoring systems, is guess what? If you're medium to low risk, you're going to go majority of your transactions will go undetected unless they're you know, a multiple of XYZ. But we will only ever really see who the client is through the activity on their account. And if you are low risk, in some banks, your account will never be reviewed, because the bank's argument to the regulator is, we apply a risk-based approach. We have sufficient monitoring and control risk mitigating measures that we are comfortable with the risk that presents itself with low risk accounts, that we don't review them. And yet these are the very accounts where most likely the illicit activity is going to be happening. So we've just followed the regulation so much, and going back to your word in terms of intelligence, that we've kind of completely lost track of the fact that the only way we really know who our clients are is by the way in which the account operates. And without intelligent technology, which thankfully we're now beginning to implement, and Wolfsburg actually spoke to this 2 weeks ago in their new paper and said, you know, we need behavioral analytics in transaction monitoring systems. Otherwise, we can't identify complex networks within our books. And going to John's point in terms of shell companies and connected parties, these complex networks will be unidentifiable to the human eye. We need that technology. So I'm really, really glad that we've just jumped straight into the deep end. I'm of the opinion, not so much rip up the rule book, and I'm not saying the efforts that have been undertaken by organizations haven't been worthwhile. It's been a great starting point, but we need to go back to the drawing board. We need to simplify and remove silos, and that's exactly obviously what we're going to be talking about today. So to kick it off, half an hour into this, the first section we're going to talk about today really was about the need for real-time compliance and building a unified strategy. And I suppose that's exactly what we spoke about. We spoke about why the silos don't work. And we've spoke about accurate data and high quality data being the foundation. But I think it's very important if we then quickly jump into the second point, because, you know, that's been, and unless anybody wants to pick up on this, I think we've kind of addressed this in discussion points, but is there anything anybody wants to specifically speak to on this discussion before we jump into the cross-industry exposure?
Well, I could add in another point. I mean, about the whole concept of seeing the trees. If you think of the trees as being the SAR reports, and then missing some bigger things, like, for example, if there is a bank and the bank is filing tons of SAR reports, and there's also an FIU, and the FIU is looking at paying people every day to look at all the SAR reports, there could be really big things that get missed. For example, in the case of the central thing that's my complaint is the Latvian government setting up straw owners of banks, which is where the bank's entire ownership is fake, that they say that they're owned by, in this case, it was partly owned by the EBRD Development Bank and partly owned by a particular American billionaire, and then he set up another shareholder who was a famous American, Paul Volcker, who used to be chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank system, and he has passed away. But anyway, for a period of time, they were telling people who challenged them on, look, we see this payment between these shell companies and it went through your bank and it must be wrong, where they were saying, well, our shareholder is Paul Volcker and he used to be chairman of the Feds and he has the highest integrity in the world and therefore this is not possible. But, then to look a step deeper and find out that the shareholders of the bank are not normal shareholders who paid for their shares, but rather the government is paying them to act as shareholders, it sort of reverses the whole thing. But somehow people got stuck at just looking at the SARs and didn't look at something which was much bigger than that.
Yeah. And I think the problem with SARs as well, or STRs, depending on your jurisdiction, is the fact that they are so fragmented. And, it's one of the things I have to say that the Singaporean FIU does really well. They've since 2013, they've actually had a digitalized system called Strolls. And what they've used since then is very, very early stages AI adoption in order to try and identify connections amongst SARs that were being basically submitted. So they standardized the submission. But however, what we saw also on the other side with, let's say, Wirecard, was that the German FIU was doing this horrendously, but I think they were still using a fax machine for submissions up to around 2019, let's say 2017 to be fair to them, but I think 2019. And that required an incredible overhaul, which your Dr. Marcus Player, ex-president of FATF, played a major role in. And we know that with AMLA, they are now, 68 days into the game, 69 days. One of their biggest focuses will be the amalgamation of the FIUs across Europe, which is a massive undertaking in itself. But you're absolutely right, John. It's so I remember once training I shouldn't have mentioned the country, but I was training an FIU in one country in Asia. And towards the end of the discussion, I asked, did anybody get any questions? And one of the questions from one of the FIU employees was, so where should we start? And I said, I'm sorry, what do you mean, where should we start? Well, as you rightly said, John, we have tens of thousands of SARs submitted. Where should we start looking? Like, which one should we be looking at first? And that kind of set off alarm bells in my head of, I would have kind of expected the SARs strategically to have been, when they're filed, bucketed into different buckets depending on potential connections, parties involved, onshore, offshore, valuations. And that's another thing, valuation. Money laundering is money laundering, irrespective of whether it's...
Regardless of the amount.
Yeah. Sorry, Nadir, go ahead.
Yes, I'm saying regardless of the amount or the trend, so money laundering is money laundering. And I want to pinpoint on a point, as you mentioned, regarding building a profile for clients in order to have a good alerts or transactions monitoring red flags. We need to start to define more the practicality of having a perpetual KYC that starts from building a profile when we are screening a customers to be connected on a lot of databases, not just screening against sanction lists. We need to integrate open source intelligence to our screening system to know this client, about his approach, linking parties, companies, countries he is visiting, all of that, and to build a hypothetical profile for this customer in order what he will be dealing in our bank or in our institution. And based on that, we want to detect anomalies, regardless of the risk of the client, if it is low, medium, or high. And based on that, we will be more effective and efficient, I think, at this point.
Absolutely.
To have a more efficient SARS, without a defensive SARS regarding sending to law enforcement or FIUs.
And maybe that, to your point, that's we need to better understand how we profile our customers.
Mm-hmm.
Working in law enforcement, profiling criminals and illicit activity is 101. But in organizations, we seem to think that KYC is profiling, and it's not. CDD processes is not profiling. We're literally just gathering data based on the customer and putting that into our system. And as we said, we do nothing further with that. It doesn't.
Most of the other times, it's not verified, this data. So
exactly.
Here is the clue. Yes.
And that's why without digital identity, to an extent, it's a meaningless exercise. In my honest opinion. Okay, so we are going to jump now into money laundering across industries, and I think we've got a quick video that we're going to play. So this is our moment where we can all quickly take a quick, sip of water. So I will pass it over to the team.
We all love our neighborhood candy stores, but what if I told you these are not average Wonka bars, but golden tickets to laundering? Rumors are swirling that some candy stores are actually fronts for money laundering. But how can a sweet shop turn sour?
Come on. Let's boogie.
Take Copenhagen and London, for example. Some official media channels have pointed out suspicious candy stores. You may also look around at the candy stores around you with few customers, yet they manage to stay in business. How?
I feel like they're just wasting their money. I feel like all the stuff over there, they've expired.
Candy stores deal mostly in cash, making them hard to audit. It's easy for owners to inflate sales or disguise fraudulent transactions due to the difficulty in tracking inventory and waste. Some have even suggested these stores might be linked to terror financing, making it crucial for authorities to keep a close watch. So AML watchers, next time you crave something sweet, maybe notice is your local candy store just a sweet escape or some deep laundering with Wonka bars.
I'm so happy that we had Willy Wonka in there. One of my favorite movies of all time, although I have to say I'm more of a Gene Wilder Willy Wonka fan than a Johnny Depp, but I think Johnny Depp did do the role justice. Anyway, that's just my personal opinion. So onto that, obviously money laundering across industries. We typically, in the past, and having lived in London, for many years before I moved over to Asia, I lived in Bayswater, and I remember every third shop was a money transfer business. It was for a bureau de change. And I thought, how can we need so many money changing businesses in one street? And then that kind of evolved to barber shops. So we moved, and Adam, you'll be very familiar with this, obviously in your previous role. We moved then from money change businesses to barber shops, and suddenly you had every other shop being a barber shop. And then obviously, if you walk down Oxford Street now, you'll see every third or fourth shop being a sweet shop, as we just saw on the screen there. And there have been a number of raids over the years where they've actually confiscated the goods to say that the goods themselves are counterfeit. But obviously there's an underlying purpose behind that, as we've just heard in the video. And I don't know, Adam, if you want to speak to that before we start. We've got another discussion on football, but I don't know if you wanted to quickly just touch on kind of the sweet shop element and the evolution of what we've seen of typologies in terms of business activities.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, this is one of my big bugbears about fighting financial crime is arguably the ease at which the criminals can integrate their money into the financial system. And, everyone's heard of it, right? Cash intensive businesses. But, it is for everyone to say this isn't some backstreet dealing that goes on. Like it's on Oxford Street, right? It's there in front of you in really high profile areas. And as you say, you go down any high street, anyone listening to this and watching this, any high street you want, pick one, walk down it. How many barbershops are there? How many things like nail bars are there? Even restaurants, right? You get restaurants and it's like, some of them will say like cash only, or even they take cards, right? They probably do a lot of cash business. You've got things like car washes. I can go on and on and on. But the fact is, right, cash intensive businesses are how criminals get money into the system. And the issue I've got with these cash intensive businesses is there is a lot of them, right? There is thousands and thousands of them. You go to any city, there's thousands of them. And the problem is these businesses create bank accounts, right? They've all got to have some sort of banking services to get bank accounts. And the problem is, as a bank, the issue I've got with these things, is, you do your KYC, the bank does their KYC, and the business goes, oh, I'm a restaurant, I'm a sweet shop, right, and I'm in Oxford Street, right? What is the expected activity? What should the bank expect this business to do, right? And this is a problem. What is and what should is what is normal expected activity of this sort of business, right? And if a transaction activity deviates and they go, I've had a 50% increase because it's summer, how are you as a bank to know that this is or isn't right? You can do things like peer analysis, as about how are the other shops doing in the area, But my issue with these things is it's really hard to assess. And, from a law enforcement point of view, unless you can sort of like survey and monitor these businesses and look at foot flow and look at the foot traffic, yes, there's other things you can do. There's other surveillance methods you can do, but it's really hard to sort of assess these businesses and work out whether it's actually real or not without doing a lot of detailed checks into the financials. It's very intensive from a law enforcement point of view. And I don't know if you've seen, but it was probably about 6 months ago now, the UK National Crime Agency did a massive case. There's a massive operation on Turkish barbers around the country, and they took them out. And there was a large number of them, and I'm talking about a large number of them, where there's these barber shops in some sort of side street in a town, but yet they're driving Lamborghinis and Ferraris. They've got a Ferrari parked out the back of the business, right? And there's best intentions in the world. There's no way that a single barber shop owning a business can afford a Ferrari. Maybe they can. Maybe I'm in the wrong game here, but the fact is,
I think we all are.
but the fact is, it's very intensive to investigate, and also from a bank point of view, it's very hard sometimes with these businesses to say this is really suspicious versus not. So that's a challenge we've got with these businesses. So that's why I'm saying sometimes it's quite easy for these criminals to just set up businesses because you've got legitimate funds going in, but also illegitimate funds, and that's where do the banks sort of determine what is legit and what's not. But no, it's doing more definitely tackling these things.
No, I honestly, I also as well saw it myself recently where I went to a local restaurant for lunch, and we were there a little bit earlier than we should have been, so it wasn't open. And then suddenly this kind of minibus pulled up, and all the kind of like the back end, if I may say that, kind of kitchen staff, etc., all got out of this minibus, and I was like, hold on, what's going on here? And then I kind of wanted to learn a little bit more about what was going on, and discovered that they all lived together, and it had all the hallmarks of human trafficking. It literally, I was just like, okay, and I'm not going to go into any more detail because obviously I may give away the details of where it was in the restaurant. But I was just like, okay, so what is this, and what's going on here? And I think that's the unfortunate part of it, is just based, as you rightly said, a Ferrari sitting outside the back of a barber shop would be a little bit of a red flag. But it's until you really get into it and understand the accounting and understand what's going on that you'll get the details. So we're in a very difficult and precarious situation that we don't necessarily see what is a front for other activities. I remember even once before being involved in a review of a transaction monitoring alert where an individual was receiving money every single month. And I've mentioned this before from another individual. And luckily, it was within the same bank. So we were able to look through to the other transaction. And the argument that was given by the client was that this was her lover or partner, and every month that was her living allowance that was sent to her. And that actually is, in private banking especially, we see that a lot, where money is sent out to third parties. And it makes me think then of the Epstein case, covering expenses of, students. There has to be a relationship, a connection. The Epstein case, clearly there wasn't. Why was he paying for Russian students to go to university? That's a whole different discussion. But in this case, it was like, okay, that is plausible. But what we were able to do was, because the accounts were in the same bank, we were able to look through the other transactions. And what we saw was every month before this transfer was made, this other individual who was sending the money to the lady was also receiving a lump sum payment from an external party in another country. And he was then keeping 10% of that, and the other 90% was going to this woman. Anyway, long story short, it was a human trafficking. It was a spa that was actually owned by the woman that was a front for a prostitution ring. But that's kind of was the base point of the SAR. And then you're leaving it in the hands of the authorities to kind of move that forward.
Investigate further.
Go ahead, Nadir.
Yes, I'm talking to investigate further the authorities regarding this point.
I have a couple anecdotal things that you'll find interesting about front businesses, which are not banks, but are used to move money around, and it's on this topic. So my old bank, I'm going to say this in such a way that I'm not going to name certain people, because I don't think you want everybody's name on your program. But my old bank, Parex Bank. So they made a loan to start a coffee franchise. It was a franchise of coffee shops called Double Coffee in Latvia originally. That was started up with a loan from Parex Bank to an employee at Parex Bank, although it was not declared to be a related party loan, to set up these coffee shops originally in Latvia, and then they spread out and they opened the coffee shops in a few other countries also. And the business just did not seem to me to be coffee, because I knew that this individual within the bank who was running it was a top offshore banker for the bank and involved with some of the largest customers of the bank. He also had a partner who is a notorious London lawyer who is also connected with top oligarchs. That those two guys connected with all the oligarchs decided to make this coffee shop chain and decided to put the coffee shops into certain countries where I'm not sure that there was actually any demand for their coffee shop, which is not up to the level of Starbucks or Costa. I mean, I don't see that this coffee shop really would have been, I've been to the ones in Latvia and I didn't see anything special about them that they should be an international chain, but it did become an international chain. It was funded by the bank because the bank made a loan which did not get repaid, and the loss went to the taxpayers for paying for making the coffee shops. And these two particular individuals were involved in it. One of those individuals also was at the center of the Danske Estonia money laundering, that he controlled the Marshall Island Shell Company that was at the middle of that. But it seemed to be a purely fake coffee shop franchise, and there were a bunch of different countries involved who could have done something. I mean, nobody got prosecuted, nothing happened. So it operated for some years across some countries. And I would assume that this was a way that they could move money between those countries, because they could say, well, the transfers are related to, they have coffee shops in both of these countries, so they need to move money back and forth between these two countries. But the whole thing seemed to be done in that way. And then on a larger scale, there was the first documentary that came out on Latvian television. It's interesting that this fraud stuff has been on the television there, but the prosecutors have not done anything and the regulators have not done anything. But there was a documentary. I was interviewed. Another person interviewed was the prosecutor from Spain named Jose Grinda Gonzalez, who was the prosecutor against the Tambovskaya Mafia in a famous case in Mallorca, where some of the mobsters were. They were trying to buy the very large company called Repsol in Spain, it's the major oil company in Spain, and it has service stations all across the country. So the Russian mob was trying to buy that company, and he was talking about how, well, if he ran the Russian mob, what he would do, this is the prosecutor talking, is that he would buy some kind of company like this where there's a huge amount of money coming in and out from many, many different customers every day, and where you can commingle the money laundering into that. So that was something. Another thing a little bit related, which I have some concerns about, but these people I'm sure don't want to be named. But anyway, there's two particular oligarchs from Alpha Bank in Russia, who Alpha Bank also was closely linked to my Parex Bank in Latvia. And they, through their Luxembourg fund, own a big UK company called Holland & Barrett, which is it's a retail business all over the UK and international as well, with tons of money coming in and out all the time. But that's owned by the same guys from Alpha Bank of Russia. I mean, they could run any amount of money through Holland and Barrett. I mean, I'm not sure if they are doing that. They've never been accused of that. But it just seemed to me that based on what the Spanish prosecutor had said, that's the kind of company that's really great for them to have, because it has so many customers and so much money coming in and out from many different sources all the time, that if you need to move $1 billion of stolen money, you could very easily run it through the accounts of Holland and Barrett, and nobody would know that it was not related to their vitamin business.
Yeah. No, and you know, previously, I remember when I was living in Hong Kong, we had a local coffee shop, and I use the term coffee shop lightly. We had a coffee shop that didn't actually sell coffee. It just sold coffee beans. And I'm not going to mention the name of the chain, but it was never open, like never open. And I was just like, and I was thinking about it. I momentarily thought to myself, this seems a bit strange. And it was a little bit out of the way. I was like, why is this really reputable coffee shop who doesn't sell coffee and just sells coffee beans situated here, but yet it never seems to be open? And I was like, okay, no, it's pretty clear what it's pretty clear what it's about. But it's and we saw that quite a bit. Also as well, you know, kind of music venues. I say music venues like bars, where every night there would be just one individual standing up singing karaoke, but the bar itself would be predominantly empty. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, I was saying that it's empty, the bar. And here I want to pinpoint regarding peer-to-peer comparison between same cash-intensive businesses in the same area. So it's a real important scenario to look with. And I actually feel that financial institutions need to conduct site visit reports, efficient site visit reports in the peak of hours of work to detect such findings, and to have this effective. And know your business is the key. Know your business is the key of the customers who stand behind these customers, or who stand behind these cash-intensive businesses is very important. And how it was operated, what I have about the commercial registers, how it was registered. So all of this stuff is important. And unfortunately, as a nutshell, when we talk about financial crimes directly related to financial institutions, which is very wrong, we need to talk about different industries and how it can be regulated to fight financial crimes or to fight money laundering and terrorist financing. So we need to have the importance of to have the effective and efficient private-public partnership, and how law enforcement should impulse rules and regulations regarding and controls regarding these cash-intensive businesses.
You know, absolutely. It was actually, I remember one of these kind of, I mentioned kind of singing bars where there was the one person singing karaoke every single night. And when the new owner took it over, they were telling us this, my husband and I, the story that in order to get the papers for the business, for the transfer, they actually had to fly same day to Manila and back into Hong Kong to get the papers. And I said, but why wouldn't the owner be able to come into Hong Kong just to give you the papers? And that wasn't possible. So it kind of just shows you that there was clearly a lot going on. And football as well. I know we've got a video. Let's maybe play the video first on the football. But football for me is one of the biggest areas that we don't talk about in terms, in particular, of human trafficking. And it's become a serious issue for young men in the academies who aren't successful in getting through to the first, second teams, are now being trafficked, mostly for sex purposes as well. So let's play the video here on the football, and then we can talk a little bit to that as well.
Ronaldo. Oh, genius! Absolute genius! Oh, what a goal! One of the greats!
Football, the magnificent sport that unites us all. But beneath the roar of the crowd and the gleam of the trophies lies a shadowy underworld.
We have to clean here first.
A world plagued by corruption and greed.
Today, the former president of Colombia Soccer Federation testified that he and others accepted $1 million in bribes.
The football sector, with its low entry barriers and complex networks, is a playground for those who seek to exploit its vulnerabilities.
You know, biggest event in the world probably also means one of the biggest financial crime threat.
As FATF reports reveal, these vulnerabilities are more than just cracks. They're gaping holes in the integrity of the beautiful game. With massive cash flows and unpredictable financial results, football becomes a tempting arena for money laundering. Outside the major leagues, the lack of professionalism and oversight further deepens these vulnerabilities. Young players, often from societal reluctance to shatter the illusion of sports purity, make it easier for illegal activities to go unnoticed. Investments in football offer criminals a golden ticket, opportunities to launder money and gain fame, influence, and power. Do our heroes on the field become mere pawns in a sinister game of greed? The EU's new anti-money laundering directive, effective from 2029, aims to shine a light on the murky dealings of football clubs and agents, demanding transparency and accountability. We are going to fight because every watcher deserves to believe in the game, and every game deserves to be fair.
I should start with the caveat that none of the players nor clubs presented in this video or are in any way connected to our knowledge with these activities. But we have seen corruption at the very top levels of FIFA. That's something that's public knowledge, where bribes, I actually remember when this first came to light, where we actually hadn't listed senior members of FIFA as PEPs, as politically exposed persons, but yet they have access to nearly every single top-level government individuals in the world. And then we find at the time, the then president of FIFA, his son was actually moving the monies that he'd received as bribes through accounts, structuring them to make sure they went under the radar of notification to the relevant FIUs because they didn't meet the financial threshold. And, I know that some FIUs as a result of that have reduced the financial threshold. I still think that this is it's kind of not exactly what we should be doing. But the other thing within football outside of money laundering is also, as I mentioned earlier, human trafficking. We're seeing a massive situation across the globe where young academy players who aren't successful, especially from developing countries, walk out of the club and they have nowhere to go, literally nowhere to go. And going back home in some instances isn't even possible for them because they had been hailed as heroes within their communities. And the shame, I wouldn't say them so much even the shame factor, but the expectation that they're going to provide for friends and family within that community, within their career, weighs heavily on their shoulders. And as a result, they get offers to go to other countries, and I'm going to name no names here, for other potential football contracts or employment. And what we've actually then found out since is that it actually results in human trafficking and in many instances sexual exploitation of these individuals. So there's so much protectionism that's needed at the academy levels to support individuals that aren't successful getting into the first team. But also, as we've seen, there is a significant amount of corruption at the top. And I don't know if anybody wants to speak to this. Maybe Nadir, you're nodding there. I don't know if you want to kind of lift the gauntlet on this one.
Yes. This is a great sector to talk about regarding money laundering and also sanction evasion, because we know this sector is not regulated, and now it will be regulated based on AML 6 directive. And we have the agent, we have the owner of the sport club, we have the player. So we have many schemes that can be done in this sector in order to launder money. It can start the owners of the club and the fronts of the sanction evasion party. It can be by overpricing the player value. It can be by sending the same player to another player at another club, which is also owned by the same owners that they are managing these clubs. If they are with their fronts that they are So with shell companies, we need to, because a lot of shell companies, they are owning these clubs with front of public notaries or lawyers. So all of this stuff, I think that this should be managed after releasing the AML directive in order to manage this huge sector with a huge volume of amounts that are going each season between parties.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that we need to speak to as well. So we talked there about kind of shops as fronts to backroom activity of money laundering, and also gambling as well. Again, living in Asia, I'm fully aware of a lot of restaurants have a back room that facilitates gambling facilities, and that this happens I've seen it across Asia in particular. But the one thing that we haven't touched on yet is social media being used as platforms for fraud, for fundraising and money laundering, and also as well, basically chats such as Telegram, WhatsApp, being used by fraudsters in particular to recruit money mules, offering fake jobs to like YouTube videos, and then using their bank account to transfer the funds, inadvertently becoming money launderers themselves without fully understanding or recognizing that. I don't know, obviously, Adam, this is something that you saw professionally, and obviously you've now seen working in the industry. I think social media is one of the biggest concerns for me, and the exposure it has to, in particular, vulnerable people. And I'm not just talking here about, elderly people, but also younger individuals, or indeed people from lower income families, where 200, 300 pounds a month is going to make a significant difference to what they can put on the table for their children.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it is. I think you've hit the nail there. It is generally younger people. The older people generally don't use social media in that same sort of way. But the younger people, that is the primary recruitment channel now for mules. So to create mule accounts and for youngsters to be recruited into, like you say, money laundering. Even things like, I don't know if I put a post out on LinkedIn a little while ago, but things like violence as a service. So like getting youngsters and people to commit the crimes of the organized crime gangs for a fee, or to be given a bit of money. That's how they're recruiting these individuals as well, through social media platforms. But I think beyond that, I think social media platforms have a lot to answer for, and I think there's a lot they're not doing, because I don't know if anyone's tried it out, but I've certainly tried it out on a regular basis, and it still stays the same. If you go into, not that I've got these accounts, I created them for research purposes only, but things like TikTok.
Caveat out there, Adam.
Things like TikTok and Facebook, and those accounts. If you go into things like the marketplaces, I don't know if anyone has done that yet, but go into marketplaces and you just scroll down. There's sponsored adverts for people offering to, money laundering, saying, can you launder money for us? And there's people just with loads of money, thousands of pounds they're throwing around the room or in a bedroom, or they're putting it through a cash counting machine, saying if you want this lifestyle, contact us now. And it generally links to some sort of Telegram account, and you can then start making money, albeit you're laundering someone else's money through your bank account. The other thing they're also advertising as well, which is actually quite a common thing, if you just scroll down, you won't have to scroll far to find it, is there's adverts for businesses offering counterfeit cash, cloned cards, offering cards with money from PayPal, aka stolen, compromised accounts, et cetera, et cetera. And the list goes on and on, but it isn't hard. Even as Joe Blogs Public, you'd have to look hard to find these adverts on these social media platforms. And they're sponsored, or they're adverts that have been paid for, probably through some third-party companies. But the fact is, it is pretty rife on that. And we all talk about fighting financial crime and tackling financial crime, but the fact is, it is available to tens of, if not hundreds of millions of people around the world through social media, not just one platform, but pretty much every platform in some way, shape, or form. You can access these services, you can access this money, and you can actually access criminals looking to recruit you. So yeah, there's certainly more needs to be done by social media platforms to, not have it openly available, and actually as free as it is as well.
Do you think, and maybe this is a bit of a kind of a contentious discussion point, but a couple of years ago, Ofcom in the UK was given authority to oversee social media platforms in an attempt to better kind of regulate this. And I'll be honest, my personal opinion is I've seen really nothing at all coming out of that. And the education for vulnerable people, in particular children, is primarily being done by victims' families and by the police force in terms of sextortion cases that we've seen.
Blackmailing.
Go ahead, sorry.
Blackmailing. I was adding on your point about blackmailing.
Yeah. And, and I've actually worked with and worked alongside some mothers whose children have actually killed themselves, unfortunately, as a result of these sextortion gangs that are run out of primarily, we see it Western Africa, not Southeast Asia. That's more kind of the pig butchering, crypto scams that we're seeing there, romance scams. But these ones are primarily coming out of Western Africa. And when I then go back to what are we doing to protect our children? And as a mother of 3 daughters, I'm very, very aware of, they watch YouTube, and I, sometimes I see things come up and I'm like, girls, that's not even, some of the language that's used, that's not okay. What defenses and what protections are we really putting in place to support the vulnerable? I feel a lot of the onus is actually is being put on either the parents who have lost their children, or indeed the police force who are already absolutely swamped and have limited financial capabilities. And I think we need to see much more at a government level, or indeed an international level, because these aren't isolated in-country crimes. They are cross-border crimes. And as we saw with the pig butchering in Southeast Asia, when the Thai authorities were approached, sorry, my computer likes to zoom right in on me. When the Thai authorities, and I saw that this was actually broadcast on a news interview, when they were approached about why aren't we doing more to shut down these compounds that are being used for the procurement of these pig butchering scams, the response was, well, most of these crimes that are happening overseas. So they're not within our jurisdiction. So we need international cooperation. And yes, there are victims of human trafficking. Yes, there are victims who have been kidnapped that are basically locked within these compounds, but it's private property, and without real evidence of illicit activity happening that we can pinpoint to this location, we are powerless to enter. And so you end up with this kind of whole public partnerships between enforcement bodies, and it's really, really difficult. And I understand their challenges from the legalities. So once again, we are all bound by the legal system, but yet the illicit actors are not. So go ahead, Adam.
Right. I was going to say, going back to the whole social media thing, you're right. Generally, it's on parents, charities, schools to educate, law enforcement. But one thing we've seen recently, due to political changes, is some of these social media platforms, and I'm not going to name them, have actually wound back or even got rid of some of their governance teams, their sort of like bad content teams, the teams that sort of like doing some of the audits. So they've actually sort of gone backwards in terms of how they're sort of controlling this content and stuff going out. But yeah, I certainly think we need to do more. And like I said at the start, it's, anyone, and I mean anyone on social media could find an advert and reach out to somebody probably within 2 or 3 minutes of accessing sort of things like marketplaces and that. That's how easy it is on these sites. And it's shocking, really. We're trying to fight financial crime on one hand, but yet you've got literally within 1 or 2 minutes, I could probably reach out to somebody who's going to offer me a cloned card or some cash, or and that I'm not intertwined into the criminal network and have criminals as friends or anything. No, that's not not at all. But the fact is, as Joe Blogs Public, I could access and contact somebody within probably 2 minutes, which is scary. It is so scary that is the case.
Well, I myself, I don't know if somebody's put my telephone number in a phone box somewhere or what's going on with it, but I on a weekly basis, I get added to WhatsApp groups for these, money mule accounts. And before they change the settings, I always say very quickly, guys, this is a scam. Please do not get involved, and then I'll get deleted from the group. But it's a weekly occurrence, and I report the group, etc. But and it's some of the hallmarks are so easy to see. It's the telephone numbers aren't originating from within the country of the group that's being created. And one of I decided to play with one a couple of months ago and see like how far would this go, because I wanted to see the typology. I wanted to see how it worked. And what I found really interesting was, I'm based in Portugal, and the messages were coming through in Portuguese. And so then I would reply in English, and then they would reply in Portuguese again. And then I was like, actually, could we switch to Dutch? And then I switched to Dutch, with my husband being Dutch. And again, the perfect responses to my questions were coming back in Portuguese, because this is all, it's all set up within their systems. There's not a real person in many instances behind this. It's all automated. And it was just going through translation machines in the background and then coming back again. It was very, very cleverly done. I have to say that. So, conscious of time, whether you believe it or not, we've only got 45 minutes left. This is going along nicely. And we're going to have
I can add a quick comment.
Please, yes, John, go ahead.
About all the, how many thousands of people get scammed with different kinds of scams every day, and is it possible to protect these people? And of course, it's sad to read that somebody, maybe a person who's not very sophisticated, got scammed and lost their money, and now they're depressed. But what it brings home to me is that, okay, most of the crimes, maybe it's impossible to stop them, but when things actually get caught, they do get discovered, there should be a law enforcement response, which is something that I have not seen with, this whistleblowing thing in the banks that I'm familiar with. There have been so many thousands, tens of thousands of crimes. The central bank my old bank, Parex, had 80,000 shell company accounts. Its sister bank, ABLV Bank in Latvia, had 40,000 shell company accounts. You could say that's 120,000 different criminal scams going on. But the problem is that even then, though some of them do get with the light shown on them, where everybody can see that there is a criminal thing happening, there still is no law enforcement response, which, the easy ones they should get for sure. And it sends such a backward message when you're trying to protect all the thousands of people getting scammed, that sometimes something does get discovered and then law enforcement still does not do anything. The most obvious one to me was this Polish bus company called Solaris was paying bribes to City of Riga for selling buses to Riga City. And I was whistleblower of one aspect of that in 2005. The United States Department of Justice caught it in 2010. The Polish government caught it in 2018. And it apparently is still going in 2025 because still nobody has been prosecuted. And it started off at Parex Bank, which then became a subsidiary of the EBRD. Then it got moved to Citadele Bank, which is still a subsidiary of the EBRD. Then it got moved to the European Investment Bank. So the European Investment Bank, a public company, is funding all this unprosecuted bribery, where the bribes started in 2002 and are still going in 2025 and got caught 3 times or got exposed 3 times, but not caught in the sense that, the police didn't arrest anybody, but they let it just keep going on. That at least, although you can't help everybody in the world, you can't help them, but at least when something is 3 times caught by 2 different governments and a whistleblower, at least then it seems like there should be a law enforcement response. And then when there's not, it's really disappointing.
Yeah. And it's interesting there, John. You talked about vulnerable people. It's actually not the less sophisticated, indeed at times less educated. There was a case that I was working on recently. The individual is an aeronautical engineer with a PhD, and they had been scammed of over 1.2 million of an investment scam that became a very sophisticated. The psychological elements were just mind-blowing. Investment scam, which became a romance scam, then coupled with being continuing as an investment scam, and the level of sophistication of the scam coupled with the psychological element was just mind-blowing, and frightening as well as an individual to see just how even educated people can fall for these scams because they want to believe, especially in the instances of these romance scams, that they're building a future with someone. And if this individual had just been able to reverse engineer the pictures that were being sent of the individual, they would have seen that this individual was actually a social media influencer from Korea. But again, it's about understanding the typology and red flags. And in some instances, it doesn't matter what you say, those individuals, even as educated as they can be, they don't want to believe it's a scam. They genuinely want to believe that this is a real, true infatuation, and they do have a future with this individual. And I think Becky Holmes, the author of, Keanu Reeves is Not in Love with You, a brilliant book about romance scams, was talking the other week about working with US and British law enforcement, where a lady in the US was traveling to the UK with a bag of cash to hand over to this celebrity that she was in a relationship with, and she only didn't board the flight because she saw the celebrity was actually going to be elsewhere. But there were law enforcement waiting on both sides to pick her up and support her. To this day, she still believes that the celebrity is in love with her. She doesn't want to believe that all of the other red flags present themselves. So again, this is the level of sophistication. People have become so manipulated that they're beyond reason. And unfortunately, in those instances, you just really can't help people. So we're, again, as I mentioned, we are really working our way through. We're not even on the third agenda of 7 points. So we're going to quickly jump. There's lots of comments coming through in the comments room. So thank you, everybody, for that. Some people have talked about gambling. We could talk from cross industry. There are so many areas that we could speak to, and unfortunately we don't have time today. I think each of these subjects could have been a 2-hour discussion on its own. But what we're going to do next is we're going to talk about connecting money laundering, AML, KYC, so know your customer and know your customer's business. And basically a more of a unified competitive edge that organizations need to have. One of the biggest challenges that we have is this whole legal entity identification. And in fact, a few years ago, I worked together with the Bank of International Settlements, where we actually, BIS, where we wrote a paper on the need for global LEIs, legal entity identification numbers for businesses, given the disparity and fragmentation between corporate registration agencies across the globe. Indonesia was a great example, where it's not even a centralized agency, but it's actually fragmented across the various states or counties, as you could say, within Indonesia. So you have to go to local offices. Then you have other centralized, registration capabilities, such in the UK, Companies House, which we've seen the likes of Ray Blake and Graham Barrow continually showing how there's a massive breakage in terms of the actual due diligence that goes into these companies before they're registered. And in many instances, the entities that are involved, the businesses involved in illicit activity, mostly they're open for less than 1 year, maximum below 18 months, because that's when in many jurisdictions, the reporting requirements will come into play for accounting purposes. So most of the activity happens within the first 12 to 16 months before the entity is shut down and they move to plan B, C, D, E. And that's what we've been seeing a lot of the frauds. So what do the importance of LEIs and understanding the verification requirements, and even working in private banking as well over the years, one of the challenges we've had is having to accurately rely on, even Germany, in-country corporate registries. We haven't been able to fundamentally do that, and we've had to do our own verification. In some instances, bring in external vendors to support forensic KYB or forensic KYC, so that we can get a better understanding of the entities. So I don't know, Nadir, if you want to pick up that point first and foremost about the challenges in KYB.
Yeah, exactly. As you mentioned, that the start of this point is the corporate registries. As we know, in most of the countries, these corporate registries are not up to date, are not online, are not directly integrated to databases or to financial institutions, which make this mission is harder. So I think integrating blockchain in having corporate registries and to be intelligent to databases, integrating blockchain data points in order to know the trace of the ownership changement and what is happening regarding the registry of this company and the owners of this company, and how what is the changing is getting through is very important. In addition to that, law enforcement should, corporate registries officials should have conducted due diligence before registering any company. The basic of the due diligence should be conducted. So it's very important. This is as a side for having a holistic corporate registry. And the second part of financial institutions, we shouldn't only rely on legal documents and who is the owner of such a document or the BRO. We need to identify the physical address of this company, the main business of the company, who is their customers. Know your customer, know their business, know their suppliers, the product. We need to screen their address if this address is matching with another address of a sanctioned entity, or if it is in another scheme of money laundering or sanction evasion. So, in my opinion, to validate a company only based on its legal document as a financial institution is very childish. We need to go further. We need to go to conduct know your business, to conduct know your customer, where their customers outreach, where their country out there. So we need to know all this stuff, their suppliers, their products, all of this stuff, their business model, to understand this business model and to figure out if this business model is valid. Yeah. So based on the region or all this stuff. So I think there is a lot to talk about this point, starting from law enforcement, private-public partnership, enhanced corporate registries, and to be online, to be always up to date, to put a blockchain technology to ensure that all data is not erased. All this stuff is very important to at this point, Onan.
Yeah, exactly. And blockchain technology as well, and the use case for that. Just I know it's this jumping kind of back into social media channels, but one of the things that I looked at a few months ago was there. I saw a number of news articles about where creators on platforms such as OnlyFans weren't being able to get payouts from their bank accounts because the banks, and rightfully so, were saying, like, we don't know where this money has come from. And, we need to understand where the money has been sent from and, what's it for. And what was really interesting on the back of that was that I spoke with the CEO of OnlyFans, and she's an ex-lawyer herself, Keely, and she said, why don't you look at it for yourself? Instead of me telling you the controls we have, why don't you try to create an account and you can see? So I went through the entire process of firstly becoming a user and then trying to set up a creator account. And it was more stringent in terms of verification and ensuring that there was name matching on bank accounts than some fintechs, even in terms of onboarding for them to use banking activities or to open a bank account. And then when I asked the question, so you do have all of KYC data, you know, you do have all of the data on where the money transfers have come through. You can pinpoint down to the last dollar where money has been sent from because of the, you know, name matching on bank accounts, etc. What's the problem? And the problem was that whenever the payments went through a third-party payment provider and from OnlyFans being sent out to the creators, that information didn't flow through. And that was a perfect example of the use case of blockchain, where as if the data was stored, encrypted into the blockchain, it could have easily been moved out in compliance with GDPR, etc., to the banks in order for the banks to have the relevant information they needed to support their concerns with regards to understanding the origination of the funds. And so, again, something simple to solve the problem using technology. But then the challenge was many of the financial institutions didn't, or at that point, and maybe even still today, didn't have that capability to receive the information via that technology channel. And so blockchain in its inception has so many functionalities and capabilities that we should be exploring to better facilitate and support the new generation of working, which is going to be predominantly virtual, and people using these platforms for generation of income. And we need to really get the banks on board with this as well. So just because you mentioned blockchain. Okay, so I don't know, Adam or John, if you want to jump in on any of these points, we can also just talk about OnlyFans if you wish. It's up to you. Happy Monday.
I can add to that. Look, I think everything that's Nadir said. I think one thing we need to remember with this whole KYC thing is it is a living process, and I think sometimes we forget that. It isn't just you get the information from the customer and then you're done. That's great, sorted. Let's onboard and that's it. But there is, it's exactly as Nadir said. There has to be the validation, right? You can't rely on the customer giving you the information and then lo and behold telling you the truth. Because shock horror, people don't always tell you the truth, believe it or not. There has to be an element of, looking outside. How can you validate and verify this information? But also, then goes into that whole ongoing process. And I think it was mentioned earlier. I think Nadir and John has mentioned it, and so have you, but this whole continuous, perpetual, whatever you want to call it. But it's about having that sort of data, but also having it as a living process, because things change, information changes, customers change. But it's about being able to update that continually and reassess. How do you monitor them? Do you have to change the monitoring of the customer? Has their sanctions or has their screening changed? All these things have to be considered across the entire life cycle of that customer. And one place I think we need to get to as an industry is, and I know it's been toyed with. I know things like Cosmic in Singapore is arguably quite a big success, but I think that needs to be replicated around the world, right? In quite quickly. The whole having a central repository, because the chances are, if we are onboarding criminals, right, these businesses, KYB or even KYC, whoever we're onboarding, these customers, if they are criminals, and we, let's not kid ourselves, we do onboard criminals, right? There's no doubt about it. We do onboard criminals, otherwise we wouldn't be here doing this job, right? The chances are you are not the only bank they've got an account with, right? They've got accounts with other banks. They've probably told other banks probably different information to what they've told you, just try and keep themselves under the radar. So if there's the ability to, a bit like the fraud databases we've got, things like in the UK there's CIFAS, a fraud sort of like database where if someone's a fraud, so they go into CIFAS. You've got Cosmic in Singapore. Those systems and those processes and those sort of centralized databases, in my opinion, are critical, especially at KYC stage, to be able to say, actually, this company's onboarded with our bank, but actually they've also got 3 accounts with different banks, and it seems like the information they've told different banks is slightly different, because then that raises a red flag. So I've digressed a little bit from that whole like original KYC thing, but there has to be an ability for banks to be able to share data in a non-competitive way, to be able to say, actually, this customer's told us different things. So what's going on here?
This is actually I had this discussion last week, and for the life of me, I can't remember who I was speaking to about it. But it was about the kind of actually, I do remember it was in a podcast with Owen and Evan from MoonPay and FSCom and Jane Blakeway from Transform Finance. And what we were talking about was reporting requirements. And currently a lot, well, actually all banking reporting, it's push. So the regulator or the FIU will request information or law enforcement, and then we push through the data to them. And I think reporting, going to your point, and getting data, we need to reverse it. We need a pull factor. And again, in consideration of data protection, but we need the regulators to be able to pull data out of the systems where they see, and even from the FIU perspective, are we seeing this name or this entity or these individuals in any other organizations, and being able to pull those connections together without having to wait for the entities to respond to a request for information and an ROI. Because the challenge is, as you rightfully pointed out, there is a plan B, C, D, E. The minute that you cut off the head of the snake, the criminals already have their next plan in play, because to your point, they will have opened other bank accounts with other entities under different guises, and they will immediately divert to that. So I think we need to really rethink how we're collecting data from organizations. And I would like to see a more integrated approach where the regulators, government officials, or the oversight, the regulator is approving these entities. And I believe that they should have a direct ability into the entities to pull the data out that's needed in order to preserve the integrity of the financial market. And that's a shift I would like to see happen. I know there's a lot of arguments around data protection and privacy, etc., but there's ways in which we can do this in the right way to help better protect the market, and also ultimately individuals who become then victims. I don't know if you have any thoughts around that.
Sorry, can I just add one point, and I will.
Please go ahead.
But
no.
We talk about data protection and go, there's data protection issues. There is. Look, don't get me wrong, there is data protection issues, but I'm going to be quite controversial here, right? The fact is, right, most of us on this call are happy to. How much data has Google got? Right, you talk to Alexa all the time, and you sort of, and you say, "Oh no, can you do this? Can you do that?" You've got watches on you, digital watches that monitor your health and monitor where you are, and you've got location trackers on. Right. My point here is, how much data do we give to the tech companies, the big tech companies, the Facebooks, the Googles, whatever you want to name? Right, we give our data to these things. From a data protection point of view, what we are saying from a financial crime point of view is, we are trying to stop and prevent financial crime, right? And we're not going to take your name and address and start using it and selling it to private companies to make a profit. The fact is, it's there to try and protect people. The only people who should have a problem with that are the criminals who might get caught. Like that's my personal viewpoint. Is we talk about data protection. I get that there is data protection laws and people have got concerns about data being shared, but it's generally data being shared with generally government agencies for crime prevention issues. But yeah, I'm sure other people got different viewpoints. So that's my view. Is like, how much data have you given to private companies already?
You're absolutely right. Like, in all honesty, the valuation of the likes of Google, I'm actually in particular Amazon and Facebook is not on the tech. It's actually on the data that it holds. And you have an Alexa in your house. That is a listening device 24/7 that captures everything that's being discussed in your home. Facebook is another perfect example. After this discussion, I'll probably today suddenly get some posts up of interesting things that we've discussed on my Facebook as adverts. How many times this is what they once you've installed these devices into your phones, into your homes, they are inherently just collecting ongoing data of what's happening in your environment. And I think that's a frightening reality that many people don't seem to realize. That's the world that we're living in today. So even in your own home, data is being gathered. And again, to your point, illicit actors as well will have the same devices. They have iPhones. One of the things that actually when I realized it and I was able to change the settings, but that Facebook in the background was lifting every single photograph from my device and uploading it in the background, pending whether or not I wanted to publish those pictures onto my Facebook account. And this was a few years ago. And I was, this is pictures of my children, etc. And these are pictures that I don't want to be shared. My kids in the bath, or silly little things. These are pictures I would never want in the public arena, but yet I found that they were in the back end of Facebook, and Facebook had access to this information. It's frightening when you don't know how to use the technology or the abilities of the technology you've installed on your phone or in your home, and then you discover this. It's a frightening reality. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm thinking of there was a financial conference I attended where at the beginning of the conference, they asked everybody to install the app for the conference, so we see the agenda and we can message each other. And their app was asking for permission to access all of the files on your phone. So it's like the whole conference was about how you shouldn't give up all your information to everybody, but in order to use the app for the conference, you had to consent that they could look at every single thing on your phone. I mean, some of the things, by the way, to get back to blockchain and that whole thing, and it's also, there's also the open banking concept in the European Union, which is not on blockchain, but could be, I suppose, is that the idea would be that if you apply to a new bank to open an account, that you can, at your option, allow the new bank to look at your information that the old bank had, or that if you have this self-sovereign identity on blockchain, that you can, it's not like everybody in the whole world can look at all your information, but you can give permission to one institution to look at your information just for the purpose of opening an account. There's some hopefulness coming from that.
Absolutely. And we've actually had this in banking for many years. What was the name? Bankers Almac, that we used to use for onboarding the financial institutions, where it's a central depository that holds all of the CDD data that we needed for banks in a central depository, so that they didn't need to provide all of the documents, authorized signatories, everything again. You just accessed it through Bankers Almac, and I'm sure there's other providers nowadays. And it's similar to that. Just one thing that I learned last week, which I was actually really, really surprised about as well, in going to banks and connections. I was chatting with Dr. Nicola Harding, previously from We Fight Fraud. She's a criminologist, and she was telling me about some research and some projects she'd been working on, looking at the security controls on some online banking platforms. And in some of these platforms, some of these banks, you can connect to other bank accounts that you have. So you can actually see in one platform your other bank accounts. And what was happening is that when mobile phones were being stolen, for example, in the UK, very quickly, if they'd seen you enter in your password or whatever, or your phone was already open, they quickly jump into your settings. They change the facial recognition. And that facial recognition was then transferring over to some of these online banking platforms, and they were able to go into the online banking platforms, and because of the lack of security measures, the fraudsters were able to transfer not just the money from that app for the bank that was in your phone, but any connected accounts. They were able to pull the monies from those accounts into that centralized account, and then basically transfer that money out. So before you've even been able to report your phone stolen, your multiple bank accounts connected have all been drained, and the money. And I was really shocked about this. I didn't even consider. And there are some banks where that's not possible because they will identify where facial recognition has changed in your phone. Some require a password. But it was just a really interesting observation, which I hadn't even considered before, about the way in which criminals are actually operating. Sorry, I know that's kind of digressing from what we're discussing, but I thought it was an interesting discussion point. Conscious guys, I know I sound like a timekeeper here. Well, technically I am. With 20 minutes left. Let's see. So we've talked about KYB. We've talked about the intersection between AML, KYC, and KYB. We do need a centralized, open source, blockchain utility use case for this. We've been and that's where, I suppose, LEIs really come into play. What we found through our research with Bank for International Settlements, and there is a paper out there which is available which covered this, was that certain countries weren't willing to implement the standardized requirements for LEI because it would add a price implication to the cost of opening a business, which they felt would impact the ability of more individuals to open companies. So that was where the constraints sometimes fell, was because of the price consideration. So it was interesting, and also as well, in some countries they just don't want this data to be shared. So we're going to then kind of quickly jump into AI. We've mentioned AI and the role of data from the very inception of today's discussion, and as we've discussed, the future of basically risk management, not even compliance, but general risk management, is data-driven and is tech-driven, and those two intersections must come together. Genetic AI is revolutionizing, in particular, AML compliance, providing faster, more accurate risk assessments. I'm of the opinion that's only possible if the AI agent has been trained properly in the products and services that you're providing and understands your third-party risk, your service channel risk, your distribution channel risk, in addition to industry, geography, and client exposure, which I don't think is actually done very well at all in our industry at the moment. But I'd really love to get your thoughts about using AI and kind of enabling AI power systems to perform much better with better data, and in particular in the financial crime space. And maybe, Adam, if you don't mind, from the vendor perspective, I'll pull you in on this first. You're obviously seeing this transformation happening day in, day out, in front of your eyes. You're seeing the roadmaps being built for the engineering teams to be working on this. How realistic is it for us to expect the AI advancements to happen as quickly as we need them? And what are we really looking at? In my opinion, we're at the infancy of capabilities and really understanding that. But really, what are your thoughts around the speed of innovation? And are we being hindered as well by, and again, I wrote an article on this yesterday, which I published, on the fragmentation of AI regulation?
Great questions. So look, from a technology point of view, from a technology point of view, like, innovation is rapid. I'll leave it at that. You think, where we were even 5 years ago, right? Generative AI wasn't even a thing really then, and now we've got generative AI, which was first introduction, which is effectively ChatGPT, which is what most people know as generative AI. Now you can make videos, you can literally make fake photographs, you can change people's voices. The evolution of that is rapid. And now, I guess, from a financial crime point of view, I would say probably the last 18 months, maybe, we've now got this term agentic AI. In layman's terms, what is agentic AI? Agentic AI is basically AI that can effectively make decisions. Okay, so it's an evolution of generative AI, LLMs, but it means that it can actually make decisions. Is it as good as a human making a decision? Absolutely not. And I think we shouldn't be naive to the fact that it can make human decisions. But what it is doing, is it good? Is it good right now for detection, to detect suspicious activity? I would argue no, it's getting there, but it's not really a detection type technology yet. It's really helping organizations to be more effective and efficient in investigating crime. So it's really a sort of a speed tool. It augments a human, doesn't replace a human. What agentic AI can do is it can take away some of those repetitive tasks where a human has to go and gather that information. It knows that this information needs to be gathered. So it can just gather it for the human, wrap it up into a nice package, and summarize the output and the outcome for the human to review. The human still needs to be a critical point so any critical touch points and any critical decision points, the human still has to be involved in that decision point to say, yes or no, or make a final decision. But it really is making things much more effective. But also, it's about consistency. It's really about making sure that there's consistency in a program. So you've got different skill levels, different experiences. What agentic and generative AI can do is create a consistent journey within an organization. Ultimately, when you get things like these SAR or STR filings, it can make sure that the right data, the right information goes into that to file to law enforcement. So that is a huge advantage of Gen AI and agentic AI, is it creates consistency in an investigation program, in a alerting program, in a reporting program. It is evolving rapidly. So what I'm going to say next year might be completely different to now. We might have, and I think we will in the next probably 18 months, have agentic AI that is smart enough and trained well enough to actually start detecting suspicious activity. Other evolutions of the technology, which is I'm actually quite excited for, is around things like, I think you mentioned right at the start, which is around typology changes, right? Criminals are changing, criminals are evolving, criminals are like adapting how they do things. They've gone from nail bars to sweet shops, and what's going to come next. Things change, sanctions changes, all that sort of thing. What technologies we're on the cusp of it being able to do is, if you got like a red alert notice or a silver notice, or a notice from the FIU saying these are new threats that have come out, being able to actually take that document and ingest it into your system, and actually it to write alerting detection rules for you based on the red flags it's identified. We are on the cusp of technology to be able to do that. So the ability for organizations to adapt with speed to new changing threats by criminals, that is game changing, right? Be able to just upload threat documents and red flag documents into the system, and say this is what the rule should look like, or the model should look like to detect this activity, is a game changer. But I think one thing we need to be grounded with is, we talk about AI, agentic AI, Gen AI, and all these buzzwords, right? That's what they are, really. They are buzzwords that people just throw about, right? As an organization, you have to look at your organization. What is it you're trying to achieve in your business? What is the risks you're looking at? What are the outcomes you're trying to achieve? And what is the best technology that can help you achieve that? Okay. There's no point in putting technology in because it sounds great, it looks great, it looks really sexy and cool, if it doesn't help you achieve your underlying objectives. So I think that's what we need to be grounded with is what are you trying to achieve as an organization? What outputs do you want to get? And then it's like working out what technology can help you get to those outcomes and those objectives. But that's my piece on it.
No, I honestly, you hit the nail on the head there, Adam. The truth is, before you can even address the technology that you need, you first need to clean up your data. Then you secondly need to look at your existing systems and how they're interacting with one another and what data they're collecting. And then once you've done that whole kind of spidergram, then the next question is, where, based on our risk assessment, are our biggest risks to our business, and where do we believe the technology we could better deploy more advanced technology to mitigate our risks? And so there's a massive exercise required before you even, as you rightly point out, jump to we need AI because it looks sexy, let's throw that in. There's a massive exercise behind that.
The thing I always say, or the thing I'm saying when I speak to customers, is you need a problem looking for a solution, not a solution looking for a problem. That's Absolutely. What you need to think about, right? Have a problem and find a solution for it. Don't get a solution and try and find the problem you want to put the solution against.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be a waste of money and resources to do that as well. One of the big things that I'm really excited about is kind of this digital twin aspect. I think that's going to be a game changer in terms of efficiency and effectiveness in terms of manpower. But I read a really interesting, and I won't go into the details of it, but there was a really interesting publication about 2 weeks ago now from the University of Amsterdam on AI generation and how, because it's curated in particular, especially for social media purposes, it's actually curated to be provocative. What they found is that their AI bots would actually begin to appoint a kind of a dominant leader within the actual algorithms. It's a really interesting report. And no matter what they did, they couldn't remove that underlying bias. Why? Because the systems had been trained by humans, and as humans, all of us live in hierarchical societies. So that is a bias which presents itself across the board. So it was really interesting, again, about when you're implementing this technology, it needs to be taught in the right way by the right people, but there will be certain biases that will be implemented into your system, even unintentionally, just because of cultural observations or societal norms. And again, that's a whole different discussion, and we won't go down that avenue today.
I could say something about AI and technology, how I think it would have a big advantage in certain things that I've come across, is that with the wrong way in which many humans think about problems, where they believe what they want to believe, they believe in pleasant narratives rather than believing in ugly truth in certain situations, that, if something is going wrong at a bank, for example, and the bank sets up a front person with a great reputation, like to give the example of my old bank and former Fed chief Paul Volcker, who supposedly was the shareholder, that the bank would, a journalist told me this, that when they caught Russian mafia money going through the bank, they would ask the bank about this, and the bank would respond that it's impossible this could be happening because the shareholder of the bank is Paul Volcker. He's the most honest person in the world. They even had a stack of books by Paul Volcker, like in the office at the bank, and they would hand a book to the journalist and say, look, this is the famous Paul Volcker, who is our shareholder. And this would throw off the journalists, and it worked, but it wouldn't throw off an AI. I mean, if an AI saw that the Russian mob's money was going through the bank and they wouldn't care, the AI would not care that Paul Volcker was supposedly the shareholder. I mean, it would just say, look, the Russian mob money is going through this bank and that's it. And we don't care who's on the board of directors or who are the shareholders or how many lobbyists they hired in Washington. I mean, what we see is that this is what's actually happening. So if it strips out some of the human biases, maybe it's good.
It sounds quite similar to the whole Bernie Madoff kind of Madoff securities situation, where Bernie Madoff, very distinguished, very well-known financier. Brother was, I believe, chairman of the SEC in the US. These guys were, for all extensive purposes, these guys were the purity of the financial system, and yet there he was within Madoff Securities running one of the biggest Ponzi schemes that we saw in modern times. So yes.
Pardon? Sure. By the way, I'm not saying Volcker is a crook. I think they used his name without him knowing it, but he was actually very old also. He was, he's died since then, but I sense that he was in his late 80s and was most of the time in a hospital at the time that the bank in Latvia was boasting that because of him, they couldn't be laundering money. So, but I'm not saying that Volcker is a criminal in any way. I think he didn't know. But anyway, it was a very strong human bias that apparently worked. Or to say that, oh, this is not a Russian bank, this is an American bank, because you see right here, Paul Volcker is the shareholder.
Yeah. So was there another comment there? Sorry, thank you, John.
No, it's just me saying Madoff made off. That's all.
Oh, don't give up the day job with your dad jokes, Adam. Oh, well, on that note, we've 10 minutes left. So I think it's fair to say the next section was about, is technology enough? And I think we've actually hit the nail on the head in that it's technology is not a magic wand that is going to solve all of your problems. You need to first, rightfully, exactly to Adam's point, you need to first understand what your problem statement is and work back from that. Work back, what is your problem statement and what do you need technology for to solve that? Because you're still going to need the SME, the subject matter expertise of the right people behind the system looking at the output. So I think we've really covered, is technology enough? Well, absolutely not. And will it replace basic 101 processing roles and jobs? 100% it will. Is it going to be able, at this point in its evolution, to make the big decisions that need oversight from the teams? No. Yeah, we're not there. So go ahead, Nadir.
Yes, regarding this point, to add regarding AI and financial crime compliance, some banks or some systems providers, they are providing one-size-fits-all solution without integrating subject matter expert to that point. So this is very crucial, the subject matter expert to be in the middle of these negotiations, or what they need the client or the customer, in order to ensure that they are aligning their system with their risks and vulnerabilities that they are facing. In addition to that, to align the system with their technological framework and technological architecture that they are having with their data. So as you said, without solving a problem, it will be a problem in itself. So we should all do all of that. And as I mentioned regarding ISO 42001, auditors should be along of these issues in order to avoid subjectivity and to ensure that the output of such systems or such decisions are integrated ethically and without any subjective human intervention regarding this. So I think we will be having a lot of work regarding this point.
Absolutely. We kind of like in the vendor space, we normally talk about in financial institutions, we have the buyer, we have the decision maker, and we have the budget holder. And and focusing on the buyer, you 100% hit the nail on the head. You need the right blend of skill sets at that table, helping to make those informed decisions. You don't need 10 UNAs in a room. You need one UNA. You need one, we need different, and we need an engineer, we need somebody from the technology space, we need multiple skill sets. And I think, Adam, you and I had a real discussion about this the other day, about making sure you have the right blend of skill sets at the table. If speak, for example, Adam in this case, Adam's background in on the street law enforcement is something which I have never done. And he will have much more experience about the intricacies of financial crime typologies as a result of that, and how that works day to day in practice. But there also obviously is knowledge and skill sets that I have, given my background in financial institutions, in products, and in banking over the 20 plus years, and in legal and regulation, that complements the knowledge that he has. So bringing all of those various skill sets together in these decision-making environments is so critical. So thank you, Nadir, for kind of hitting the nail on that point. So we have got 3 minutes left. The marriage of fraud and money laundering. FRAML is from. So this is actually something which is quite a contentious point. I'm of the honest opinion that whilst fraud and money laundering, and as I mentioned, the other spectrum of financial crime typologies, let's even go back to basics here. When you do a training on money laundering, you'll find many times that it'll be entitled, AML and CFT training. Terrorist financing and money laundering are two very, very, very different things. And in fact, you could argue that terrorist financing is reverse money laundering, because in many instances, it's legitimate money being used because of belief systems and going in to support terrorism and activities. So when I see even those put together, that frightens me. And in many financial institutions, it's the same person covering them. And if you ask them, what are you doing about terrorist financing, to identify it, you'll get a big story about proliferation financing, which is really interesting. Don't get me wrong, about how agricultural products, etc., microwaves and whatever other types of chips have dual use capabilities in building weapons. But you'll hear very little about how we actually defend, I wouldn't say defend, but identify terrorist financing. So there was this big other discussion about, should we bring and combine fraud with money laundering? No financial crime typology today is one element of the underlying financial crimes landscape. We see fraud, money laundering, cybersecurity, data protection issues all blending together nowadays. And I'm a massive believer in breaking down the silos within risk management and bringing all of the expertise in those respective areas together to better understand how we can utilize both systems and data within our organizations. There are other people who argue that if anybody who says that we should put fraud and AML together, they don't understand the intrinsic workings of those areas. And they're right in the fact that fraud and money laundering are very different typologies. But because of the intersections with modern financial crimes, we have to get those teams working together, which they currently don't, because they are siloed, which obviously is the name of the game here and what we're doing. So I would, if you don't mind, I'm conscious that we're on the hour and we kind of run out of time, but if you wouldn't mind, I would love to hear each of your viewpoints on the silos and whether you think that there are opportunities or indeed challenges in bringing those silos together. And maybe starting with you, Nadir, if we just go around the table.
Yes, exactly. Thanks for your introduction regarding this important point and the convergence between all financial crimes that we are facing: fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and all of that. Regarding what should be to get out of these silos is to have integrated principled performance governance and systems that are pulling data, and we are pushing data from regarding scenarios and regarding data sharing between all these aspects, risk management framework in the institution. So this is very critical between sharing data at the right timing, not to have an obsolete data in a post-fact. So we need to have sharing data between the expertise, between the departments, and sharing scenarios regarding this. This is a very important point. And the data is the starting between this integration between these efforts in order to mitigate this convergence in this emerging financial crimes. Yep.
Perfect. Thank you, Nadir. And John, over to you.
Well, I can say within silos of different categories of work that people might be doing, because somebody could be employed and their job is a specific job. Sure, like a lot of money laundering or most of it somehow flies right over this because of the silo approach. I mean, you still need to have employees who are working on the different silos, but there should be some people who are big picture people who can see if there's some really big problem that spans across the silos and that is somehow off the radar of what the individual departments are looking at. Yeah, because it's I see this again and again with my experience where there are particular departments looking at particular things and they say that they can't see anything, and then there is a huge problem, and the huge problem is clear. I mean, there's evidence of the huge problem, but nobody sees it for some reason.
No, absolutely. And this is where MI, management information, is so critical on your top and emerging risks. And, you know, I've worked in various organizations, and one organization that, and I would just say they do it very well because they invested an incredible amount of time in it, was HSBC, which is a multitude of different, you know, pillars of business lines across multiple countries and jurisdictions, having to then feed up into this and trying to figure out like the MI and how the top and emerging risks, because you rightly said, we need big picture oversight, big picture people who see that oversight and understand where our real top and emerging risks within financial crime, for example, are really happening with the organization, so we can put the right people in the right place and even adopt technology as needed at the right time. So John, thank you so much for saying that. Last but not least, Adam, over to you.
Yeah, I'm conscious of time, so I'll keep it fairly brief. Look, my view on the whole fraud, AML, convergence, FRAM, or whatever people want to call it, is I do think from an actual investigator skill set, there is differences in terms of skill set. Somebody looking for money laundering and looking at typology of money movements versus someone looking, has someone been defrauded? Generally, it's a customer, isn't it? Whether it's a first-party, third-party fraud. Has my customer been defrauded? Yes or no? That those investigation skill sets are different. I'm not saying they can't be cross-pollinated, but generally you have people who are very good at doing one or the other rather than both. However, where I think there is an opportunity for growth is around the visual, you know, the investigation piece in terms of having a centralized view of everything. Like, you know, because a successful fraud is money laundering. Right? Let's not forget that. Right? If this fraud is successful, it becomes money laundering. So having an investigation platform where people can see the entire ecosystem, all the customers' activity, behavior, and be able to join the dots. So use fraud data to inform money laundering detection and vice versa. I think that's where that convergence should really happen. It's really sort of that detection, investigation, sort of technology piece is where that convergence could really help drive better efficiencies.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. Well, gentlemen, I want to say a massive thank you to each of you, Nadir, John, Adam, for taking the time to join us today. We have covered everything from typology changes to agentic AI, money laundering fronts, and whether it's kind of barber shops, sweet shops. We even saw Willy Wonka appearing today, which was fabulous for me. And also kind of going back to basics, like what are we trying to achieve, both through regulatory oversight and also importantly through the use of technology as your starting point. So as John rightly said, we need big picture people. And to his point, management information is your 101. But back to the point we talked about earlier, it's really understanding the inherent risks in your business and really understanding across those kind of 7 pillars of inherent risks, the challenges that you have, and then mitigating them with the right controls, which, as Adam rightly pointed out, shouldn't start with technology, but should rather start with, well, look, what's the problem statement that we're trying to solve, and how could we utilize technology to support that, but also with the right skill sets. So I would love to thank you all. Nadir, thank you so much for your time. John, thank you for your time. And Adam, thank you.
Thank you, AML Watcher.
Absolutely. And thank you to AML Watcher for bringing us all together today. This has been, I was concerned this is going to be a really lengthy discussion, but for me, in particular, time has flown. I hope it has done for all of you and also for our listeners today who have very kindly joined us. So have a wonderful day. Thank you to everybody. I'm wishing you a great day ahead. And we will see you for day 2 tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks all. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Here's